They see people like me and like Liz Cheney and like you who get sniped when you stand up alone. And they're like, well, gosh, I don't want to get sniped. Well, of course you don't. Nobody wants to get sniped. But I don't want to have to look in the mirror and think and talk to my 2-year-old kid someday about courage and doing the right thing, even when it's hard, and know that I was unable to do the exact same thing. Like, how can I say that to him?
So joining us now on Open Book is Adam Kinzinger. He's a U.S. representative for Illinois, at least the former U.S. representative for Illinois' 16th congressional district. He served in our Congress from 2011 to 2023 and is the author of a best-selling book, Renegade, Defending Democracy and Liberty in Our Divided Country. But I got to tell you, I'm a fanboy of yours. I'll explain why. I think that Jack Kennedy wrote a book called Profiles in Courage, and they were critical of that book in the 1950s. One of the journalists said to Kennedy, well, the book is quite slim. And he said, well, yeah, it's slim because it was very hard to find courage in the Congress. And that was Kennedy's quip and remark about that. And yet here you are at a seminal moment in our history where I think a lot of things are fracturing. And you stood up to President Trump. You stood up for the values of the American democracy and what once was the Republican Party. And so I'm a huge fan. I just have to say that up front, Adam, and appreciate you coming on. Congratulations on the book. How would you describe your political standing right now? Are we a dying breed? And you more so than me because you are a former elected official. I'm just one of those midnight warriors that got fired after 11 days.
Well, good to see you, buddy, and thanks for having me. And I appreciate you speaking out too, and thanks for the kind words. Like, look, are we a dying breed? I guess in a way, I would say yes, but like, it's not like we changed, and then our type of people always existed, and it's not like I guess some have kind of sold out to the Trump cult or whatever, but I don't know, man. It's like I think ultimately there's going to be a day when kind of normal thinking, I'll call it, comes back. I think it may have to take another loss or two for the GOP, or maybe it's just this moment where like everybody's kind of ready for somebody to come heal the nation. They just don't know it yet. Like the country was ready for Trump to break the nation. It's just they didn't necessarily know it, and he kind of accidentally hopped in at the right time. So I don't know, but I'll tell you, there need to be people like us out there. Otherwise, I don't see how this continues to succeed for the long term.
Well, for me personally, I have no political instincts, so I actually thought it was going to go the other way. I was 71 campaign stops with Mr. Trump, lifelong Republican, consider myself a moderate Republican, and I considered him a moderate because he was once a Democrat. He was agnostic to things like transgenderism and abortion and things like that. He morphed. I guess he needed to do that to win the presidency. But Adam, what he was doing, which I respected, and I just want to get your reaction to this, is he was speaking to a class of people, a group of people that feel disenfranchised. We hollowed out. I've had Robert Lighthizer on this podcast for his book discussing our manufacturing policies and our trade policies. And people like the ones I grew up with were directly impacted by this. In fact, I told Mr. Trump that my father's wages, if he had the same union job today versus in the 1960s and 70s, the real living wages are down about 26%, which puts the Scaramuccis on the poverty line. It doesn't put us in the middle class, which is the way we grew up. And so I thought he was championing that. That was a vacuum that was left by the Democrats. They left that space. But it became distorted. It almost became like a Frankenstein monster where now we have all of this hate and we have all of this white supremacy nonsense and so forth. Did he cause that, or was that there and did it bubble up and he became its avatar?
I call him kind of the accelerant. He was the accelerant, right? Like, yes, it was always there, and I think you're right. There was a real particularly where I'm from, the Midwest, that just felt kind of left behind and ignored by the coastal elites, and it's a reality. And so he came along and he gave voice to that. And like you said, it was an opportunity for him to give like a voice to that fear and then use that like voice. If he was a better person, if he was an actual good human being, he could have used that fear and that voice to then point people to a positive future, or at least do something, to project a positive future. Instead, all he did was he allowed the fear to get out of control, and then he just continued to use that for his own benefit. There was no bone in his body that was about like making the country better. And, he took it personal when the Democrats opposed him on things. Well, that's what Democrats do when you're a Republican. That's what Republicans do when you're a Democrat. And he took that personally. So, but yeah, I mean, look, that is a real, if I was advising Democrats, and they don't really take my advice, but if I was, I would say you have to give voice to that fear of crime. That's a real issue. That's a real fear right now. Immigration is a real concern. I'm in Chicago at the moment, and it's like there's these tent cities that are popping up, and people are upset about that. And, give voice to that kind of feeling of hopelessness, but do it with a positive focus. And I'm not sure the Democrats quite know that art either at the moment.
Well, they've got their own level of insanity going on, right? I mean, they've got this whole unhinged wokeism that's driving everybody crazy. Andrew Cuomo, who I grew up with, the former governor here in New York, said to me yesterday, the exact quote, the three worst words ever uttered by a Democrat, defund the police.
Oh, gosh.
Okay. I mean, the three worst words, right? So we both know that we have craziness on both sides.
Well, can I say to that real quick?
Yeah, please.
What you'll hear is, and you'll probably see it in the comments and you hear it from your friends, they're like, oh, the defund the police. That was like 3 people that ever said that and whatever, and it's not real. Okay, look, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you the perception. If you want to have good advice, let me tell you, the perception is that you guys are all about defunding the police. So if you're not, then go out and aggressively go after this much harder. But if you're going to get mad at me for telling you what the perception is, well, that's on you if that actually does impact the election.
Totally true. I mean, that brings me to my next question, which I think you describe in the book. I'd like to have you describe it to our viewers and listeners. So what happened? Bob Dole once said that he may not have agreed with George McGovern, but they both served in the U.S. military during the Second World War, as a result of which they had mutuality of respect. And therefore, they may not have agreed on issues of policy, but they agreed on their love for the country and the sacrifices. And of course, in Dole's case, he was wounded in the war, the sacrifices that they made. So there was some level of comity, comity. What happened, sir? Why did we get to where we are right now?
Look, I think it's any number of things, but a lot of it is, finance and fundraising is so important in politics, and it just continues to, like every year it becomes more and more important. And I remember being, showing up in 2010 or 2011, I guess, when I was elected. And, at the time it was all about, you've got to do these big fundraisers. You've got to raise money from downtown, these PACs. You've got to, find the big donors. They'll throw fundraising events for you. Everybody needs to max out. The Democrats became really good at small dollar fundraising. And then the Republicans became really good at it. Well, what's the best way to raise money? What's the best way to keep eyes addicted to television or reading a certain newspaper? It's fear, right? It's if I have you convinced that you're going to die, and the only thing that can stop it is me. Like, you'd part with anything, even if you're on a fixed income and Social Security, you'd send me $10 if you think I can stop, Nancy Pelosi or whatever the demon is from destroying this world. And so that fear became addictive. And you can play with the art a little bit of fear in politics, but you have to know when to tamp it down. You have to know when to put that fire out. And I think what's happened is fear has become so profitable and fright has become profitable. And by the way, Anthony, the best way to actually get people motivated is not like fear of the Democrats. It's fear of somebody in your own ranks that's an apostate, right? That's you and I now. You and I are the rhinos. You and I are the ones that don't show sufficient loyalty to Donald Trump. And so some of these news organizations like to go after us the most because that actually drives the most eyes and drives the most fundraising. So I think it's all of it, but I think that's basically how we got to where we are, is just using fear and kind of a loss of this feeling that, look, as a leader, I have to actually put out some good news and good ideas for people. That's my responsibility. There's a loss of that feeling of responsibility.
All right. I want to go to my birthday. Okay. I'm born on January 6th. Can you imagine that?
Oh gosh.
Okay. So on my 57th birthday, there was what looked like to me insurrection or movement, a crush of the Capitol, an invasion of the Capitol. Actually, I think people's lives were under threat. You tell me if I'm wrong. Obviously, Tucker Carlson said it was a tourist visit and people were taking selfies and it was quite mild mannered. But it seemed like the Secret Service is moving Vice President Pence pretty quickly out of the area. So tell us your words about the attack on the Capitol. And you write in the book that you felt some sense of responsibility for it happening. So explain that to people. Explain that as well.
Yeah, so I think that the sense of responsibility, and is we have to, if we're gonna if I'm gonna put out a book about myself, for God's sakes, right? Which is basically an arrogant thing to do. It feels very arrogant, but I need to be very clear about any role I played and where we are. And look, I was able to benefit from that playing with fire for a long time, right? Like our party would raise money and get votes based on that fear of Obamacare and death. I never talked about death panels, but I never stopped other people from talking about death panels, for instance, with Obamacare. And so it's like coming to recognize that, there were many more times I should have voted for the first impeachment. In hindsight, I'm glad I didn't, only because it allowed me to survive to the second one, but I should have voted for the first impeachment. And so I look at those kinds of things and I bear some responsibility for it. Probably not as much as most in my party, but I bear it. In terms of the actual January 6th, I mean, look, I predicted violence before January 6th. I get asked all the time, like, how did you know? And it was really easy. I looked at Twitter and I saw people threatening me. I saw what they were saying about what they were going to do at the Capitol. I recognized that the former president had convinced a significant amount of the Republican base that an election was stolen. And I know that, the American thing that we believe in, that we're proud of, is that we were born out of revolution. We were born out of this idea that, taxation only with representation. And I know all the base people that always talk about how the tree of liberty needs refreshed with the blood of patriots every now and again. And I knew what this was pointing to. So I show up that day. I took my gun to work, which I usually didn't take my gun to the Capitol. We were allowed to, but it was no reason, right? There's no reason to take it. I did that day. I asked my staff to stay home. My wife stayed home. And by the end of that, as everything was going down, it was so predictable to me. I ended up barricaded in my office, and I got to tell you, I'm a Christian, but I'm not one of these that says oh, I feel this evil around the corner or this darkness or whatever. But that day I felt just a real darkness that was coming down over the Capitol. It was just I don't know, dark cloud. That's the best way I can put it. And I ended up barricaded in my office. There was a point where I thought I may have to actually fight, people with a gun. And then by the end of the day, went down, gave my speech on the floor when everything was kind of tamped down. And I just remember being pissed off. I wasn't inspired by the survival of democracy or anything like that. I just remember being angry because 130 some of my fellow Republicans were still going to vote against certification of the election, even though they knew, as literally a body was still outside and glass was on the floor, they knew they caused that. But they didn't have the courage to then turn their vote. Because why? Because the most important thing ever is to keep your identity and keep your job. And that's what they cared about. And so it was a terrible day, but I say, look, we aren't defined by bad days. We're defined by what we do with those bad days. And I think that's the part of the story we're still writing, is how do we come back?
So Mike Johnson is somebody served with him. He's now the Speaker of the House. He didn't buy the validity of the 2020 election. Do I have that right, or what do I have wrong?
No, that's right. And I not only didn't he buy it, he actually led the effort. So the very first kind of sense that I got that we were actually going to do more than just go on the news and talk about a stolen election, we generally, not me obviously, but the Republican Party in general, was Mike Johnson came to me, because he obviously didn't know me that well, and asked me to sign on to this amicus brief to the Texas lawsuit, which would throw out the votes of places like Michigan. And I just looked at him. I'm like, Mike, dude, come on. You know better and you know me. I'm not going to sign on to this. And so that's where I got, like, that was my introduction to him, really, was that moment. If you look at all the arguments that were made back then, so all the arguments against, like, the election or whatever, a lot of them cite the work of Mike Johnson. And when they're talking about, hey, this, I don't know, this constitutional amendment or whatever it was they were saying, it was always Mike Johnson said. And I think the scary part to me is I know he's a smart guy. And I know he doesn't believe the election was stolen. I know that because, like, he's smart.
Right.
But he's still willing to lie about it.
Right.
That just goes to show it's the end justifies the means kind of a person, which is frightening to me.
So let's get in the mind of not necessarily Mike Johnson, but you serve with a lot of these people. I have met members of the House Republicans, and I've been a Republican fundraiser and a donor for almost 3 decades. And so they'll come into a small group meeting and say Trump sucks. And then they'll go out in the public domain and say Trump is awesome, And McCarthy, who I think is the definition of profiles in cowardice, not courage. True. He had Trump on the ropes on January 7th. He could have put him right through the ropes for what he did to the country. And yet he got nervous and it passed and he became an ex-president and no one wanted to convict an ex-president, but they had him on the ropes. Him and McConnell could have convicted him, impeached and convicted him for what happened on January 6th. So what goes on? Tell me you deal with these people. What's refreshing about you is you're now one of them, but you were there with them. So what goes on in their minds? It's cool for them to say one thing and do another and believe one thing, but act in a different way than their beliefs. Well, what is it about their DNA?
Part of the problem is, like, at those fundraisers where they do, like, Trump's insane, wink, wink, nod, nod, like, hey, I got, just so you guys know, I got to go do the Fox News thing and say, blah, blah, blah. They do that. And the problem is the donors basically let them off the hook. They kind of shake their head and like, yeah, you're right. I get it. And, that's why somebody like Nancy Mace can claim to be a moderate Republican and then go on Steve Bannon's podcast because people can look at her and be like, oh, I get it. I get what she's doing. Like, I'll say this to any Republican donors. Quit doing that. Like, start holding these people accountable. If they're going to tell you, yeah, Trump's insane, they need to go say Trump's insane out in the public because otherwise that just shows their complete cowardice. So what happens is, they need to raise the money. They don't believe these arguments. But they see people like me and like Liz Cheney and like you who get sniped when you stand up alone. And they're like, well, gosh, I don't want to get sniped. Well, of course you don't. Nobody wants to get sniped. But I also don't want to I don't want to have to look in the mirror and think and talk to my 2-year-old kid someday about courage and doing the right thing, even when it's hard, and know that I was unable to do the exact same thing. Like, how can I say that to him? And so I think just what goes through their mind is an utter fear of losing their title, of being kicked out of the tribe, because I've come to believe that people, more than they fear death even, they fear being kicked out of their tribe. They fear losing that title. And I think you have to finally confront that moment, and then you get a lot of courage. But until that point, it's like the fear of the unknown is worse than actually going forward and saying, look, I'm done with Donald Trump, right? Yes, you may lose your job in Congress. Well, guess what? There's a lot more money to be made, and you get to travel a little less if you don't stay in Congress. So it's actually quite a bit better.
But you don't, correct me if I'm wrong. You don't have that fear.
Not anymore, yeah.
You had it at one point?
I don't know. I guess, like, so here's the interesting thing, and maybe this was a God thing, I don't know, but when I came back from Iraq in 2010, or no, 2009, when I started running, I remember consciously thinking, and then I even said it out loud a few times, is like, if we're going to ask young people to die for this country, if I'm going to take a vote, like, to send people to war and, to outfit people for war, that kind of stuff, I have to be willing to give up my career if there comes a vote that is so important to the country that I have to take a vote that ends my career. And I just remember thinking about that all the time. So I think the fear was still there. Like, I never wanted to have to do that. I mean, I can talk about the times. Yes, I spoke out probably more than anybody against Donald Trump with some of the things he said and did, but there were times I didn't, and I should have too. But I think I just once it became clear to me that what was going on was going to define the rest of my life and be historic, a stolen election, that kind of stuff, the fear went away because at that point, my fear was just simply being seen as a coward historically. That was the biggest fear I had. So, yeah, I guess to an extent, everybody has fear. It's just which one's greater. And mine was the biggest fear was just to be a coward.
It's so well said, but I mean, so many people, unfortunately, don't think like that. Okay,
Right.
you served in Iraq. Uh, you're a courageous guy, so you get that from your parents. You get that from an inner voice. You get that from your family members that encourage you. Where do you get it from, Adam?
I guess I would say I get it from all of the things you mentioned. So, family, the inner voice, I think just like, okay, so training, whether it's as a pilot or, as a military member or whatever, training is all about, or let's say you're a police officer. Why do you go to the range and shoot? Because you have to be willing, you have to know what it's like to make a decision to shoot, and then you have to go through the motions of doing that. And I think for me, I just was always conscious of the fact that, I would have to make those decisions. And I think I trained my mind to be courageous, I guess, if you want to call it that. I feel uncomfortable calling it courage, but like train my mind to do the right thing. So I think that's a lot of where it came from. Obviously, great family, great upbringing, but like just always going through my head, like I may have to do this career ending thing. And it just made it likely I was willing to do it when that time came.
So, people seeking power today. Maybe it was always like this. It didn't feel like this when I was growing up. I sort of felt like the people that were seeking power when I was growing up had this great love for the country. I think, again, George McGovern, Ronald Reagan, Walter Mondale. You can like or dislike their political views. James Earl Carter, Jimmy Carter. Again, we could agree or disagree on the success of his presidency, but it seemed like they were well intended and they were pursuing the public interest or serving the people. It appears now, and I'm wondering if Citizen United had this effect.
Yeah.
It appears now that the Congress can be bought. The big pharma comes in there, big food comes in there, lobbyists come in there. The men and women want to stay in power. They know they need money for that. And if you just look at the way the laws have been promulgated since Citizens United, they favor the very wealthy, and they don't seem like that they're being anyway policies pursuing or helping the middle or lower class. What am I getting wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, say you're wrong and here's why, because it's just an observation and it's my personal one. It's not empirical.
I think it's both because I think it's two things. So first off, I think you're correct. I think Citizens United was terrible for this country. I think we're in danger of becoming an oligarchy, right? So just look at Illinois. We had a billionaire Republican that was governor. So the Democrats had to recruit a billionaire, Pritzker, to run against our billionaire. And then in the last election, we tried to find another billionaire to run against Pritzker because we needed a billionaire. Right. So what's happening is the average person is being moved out of politics. Or if you're the average person that comes to politics without money, you've got to go find these sources. And exactly the people you mentioned are the ones that bring that source with them. I think the other thing, though, is, the most addictive drug out there, I'm convinced, is fame and popularity, even though it's a pretty hollow drug. It's pretty addictive. And I think politics with, like new media, the different way of doing things, the obsession people have with Washington, D.C. now, politics has become almost more than Hollywood in terms of fame. And by the way, you can actually make your own fame now. So if you want to become famous and you want to be in Hollywood, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of luck. If you want to become famous in politics, all you have to do, anybody can do it. You just tweet something outrageous and all of a sudden you're famous. And I think that drug of fame has been really bad for who we've attracted to politics. And quite honestly, I mean, who wants the normal people that are good people? Who would look at this and want to go in, right? Because it's just so bad right now.
Right.
That's a sad thing too.
Yeah, but I almost feel like they've done that on purpose. They've like created these ridiculous barriers to entry for normal people, and they're mudraking, and they don't want normal people to enter. speaking of two reasonably normal people, I mean, at least by my observation and my interaction, are two governors, Chris Christie and Nikki Haley. I think that I think I've seen you express this, and you like both of them.
Yep.
Um, do they have any shot to get the Republican nomination?
I do
Either
think
of
there
them.
is. Yeah, I do think there is a shot. I prefer Chris Christie because Chris Christie tells the truth. Nikki, I like, and I think she'd be a great president. My only concern is I think she called this a witch hunt against Donald Trump, and I'm like, we just need more people to tell the truth that it's not a witch hunt, that Donald Trump is a witch, and it's just a hunt, right? It's not a witch hunt,
Right.
and
Right.
but yeah, I think look if you look at whatever the recent polling in Iowa is, I think Trump's still at like 45, and yet the DeSantis Haley number is like 36 combined. Ron DeSantis needs to drop out. He has no future in this. But once and some of his support will go to Trump. But once either Haley or Christie start consolidating that second place position, then it becomes a discussion about Donald Trump or Haley/Christie. And then at that point, I think there is a chance that you could start seeing people consolidate behind one candidate. To the point right now, there's just still too many candidates in the field. I'm glad Pence got out. Nobody knew what Pence actually stood for because one day he was pro-insurrection, the next day he was anti. And but I do think it's not likely, but I do think there's a decent chance that one of those two could win. Plus, keep in mind, once he's in trial, once Trump is in trial and he's occupied, and then all the details of this stuff comes out, it's going to have an impact, regardless of what people think. It's going to have an impact.
Yeah. I don't know. I just super worry. You said that the country may need leadership or may not recognize yet that it needs this transformational leader. So let's make you Dr. Frankenstein and going to put you in the laboratory. What kind of leader would be acceptable to these different sects of the Republican Party and would still have some crossover appeal to moderate Democrats and independents?
Look, I actually think it would be take Chris Christie or Nikki Haley, and I think that's it. Because let's just take Nikki Haley because she's relatively unknown compared to Chris Christie, but I think they both would have this appeal, which is I think the Republican Party would, even the most hardcore Trump supporters, once he's out of the picture, it kind of would revert back to an extent to the old Republican Party. Not the old party, but they have nowhere else to go. Maybe they go to Kennedy Jr., who knows. But I think somebody like a Nikki Haley or Chris Christie that has been a governor that knows how to work with the other side. This is Chris Christie's big thing is, he was a Republican governor in a Democratic state, obviously. And I think that's it. I think that's the Frankenstein I would put together. I would like to see a governor of a blue state, a red governor of a blue state, that knows how to stay away from the divisive social issues, right? You can be pro-life. That's fine. That's great. I'm pro-life. But that doesn't have to lead your campaign. And there's no reason to talk about it. That's the kind of person that I think can win. Certainly the middle can start to win some of those moderate Democrats. And somebody that believes again in America. This is the big key is, can you be optimistic, recognize the challenges we have, but have an optimistic message, and particularly a message of strong national defense? Because we've become in this country, we've sort of quit believing in our ability to do foreign policy, and we're still pretty darn good at it.
Very, very, very well said. All right, I'm at the point of the podcast, Mr. Author, where I have 5 words after gleaning your book.
Okay.
I have these 5 words that I'm going to read out to you, and then you can have a reaction to you can give me a paragraph or not. When I brought up with Lighthizer as an example, I said the United States, he gave me his rendition. I said, well, I sort of feel like love affair is what I would say about the United States. I feel like people like you, Adam Kissinger, and Robert Lighthizer have a love affair with the United States.
Right.
So that we're not going to go with that one, but let's talk about democracy.
Yeah, I mean, look, democracy is the hardest form of government in the world. And this is a new revelation that I've had, particularly since January 6th. It is difficult, right? It's the best form, but it's difficult. Why is it difficult? Because you have to have a basic level of trust. And all that trust is that the election counts and that the winner wins. That's it. When that is destroyed, we're in trouble.
Yeah, well, that's the
hardest form of government.
peaceful transfer of power, which is always impressive to people because 2/3 of the world lives with some level of dictatorship or autocracy. And so in the West, we've been able to make that happen for several hundred years at least. And so hopefully we can continue it. But it's rough out there, my friend. So that's the second word, courage.
Courage is just doing the right thing when it doesn't feel like the right thing. That's what I'd say about courage.
Right. And sometimes not fitting into your tribe, right? Because it's hard. Right. You have to go against the grain of what's easy.
That's right.
If I say the word politics, what do you think of?
Actually, it's a negative feeling now, which makes me a little sad that it is a negative feeling. Because I think it's an honorable profession still. But I would say right now it just feels broken. That's what I would say to politics.
Okay.
Broken.
How about the word renegade? It's the title of your book, the word renegade.
Renegade, I would put that with just being willing to tell the tribe no, or to go against the tribe. That's what I would say. Right.
So breaking from the ranks. There's when you say renegade, there's like a fun part of it. I hear maverick in that as well. You know, you're going to break ranks necessary for that. I think people find
it was a cool 80s TV show too.
Yeah, it was. See, I'm old enough to remember that, but I feel like you have a huge fan base. I'm like many of us, you're probably reading some of the negative tweets about yourself, but you should ignore those. You have a huge fan base. I think people really respect that you're red, white, and blue. That you really want, you believe in the first name of the country, which is United. Right. It's not the disunited States of America. I mean, when I read your book, that's what came out of it for me. The last word is 2 words, Adam Kissinger. What would you say about that person?
That's a tough one. How do you describe, what would you say about yourself? I just say like a middle-class kid that happened to be well known for just simply doing the right thing.
Well, that's your middle-class Midwestern modesty. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. I was with a buddy of mine this morning at the local diner. So I live in the town that I grew up in. Was a blue collar town. There's some wealthy people that live on the water. But I live 2 miles from where my parents raised me. So I went to go visit one of my friends at the local diner. And he said to me, we're living in a historic time. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there's so much craziness out there. We may end up losing the democracy, or we may be able to keep it together, and somebody 25 or 30 years from now will be writing about it or maybe doing motion pictures about it. And, your name came up. Yeah. And he basically said to me, but then you got guys like Adam Kissinger who's just really just trying to do the right thing. It's funny you say that. I'm going to be interviewing him today. And, what he said to me, which I'm going to share with you, is he said, tell him I said thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of gratitude out there for you. And I greatly appreciate you coming on Open Book. Now, I have an ask of you. I hope you'll accept my invitation. I want to bring you back when the election heats up.
Okay.
Just to talk about what's going on and what you see from the political zeitgeist. So you'll be hearing from us if that's okay.
Yeah, anytime. It was great.
All right.
I enjoyed it.
All right, Adam. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Open Book. If you own assets, you're going to be okay. But if you're a working class family like the one you grew up in and the one I grew up in, what are they doing to the money and how are they stealing my time and my energy?
When you inflate the currency, ultimately, you are stealing people's time. That's something that can't be done in Bitcoin. It's something that allows all of us to access a level playing field. In the current game, the rules are a bit rigged, right? Especially for the people that have the most, the people that already have assets. If you've got assets, if you're close to the money printer, you benefit. The rules are rigged in your favor. Everyone else is kind of fighting for the scraps. And that's why people feel so frustrated and so left behind.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today is a dear friend, Natalie Brunell. She's a speaker, a podcaster, a Bitcoin educator. She's the host of the Coin Stories podcast, which I've been a guest on, I think twice, Natalie. So thank you for that. But She has written an incredible book. I have it right here. And as I pointed out to Natalie, it's in my favorite stack behind me here, where I like to market my friends' books. But this book is called Bitcoin is for Everyone: Why Our Financial System is Broken and Bitcoin is the Solution. So, Natalie, first of all, this is an incredibly readable book. I'm going to encourage everybody to go out and buy this book because in a couple hundred pages, I think you just tell a rollicking story about Bitcoin. And before we went on the air, you and I are lamenting Bitcoin's price activity last year. But we both know that Bitcoin does what Bitcoin does, right, Natalie? There's nothing we can do about it, right? It just is what it is, right?
That's right. It's so great to see you, Anthony. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the positive endorsement on the book. And yeah, this is an opportunity, right? I mean, cheaper Satoshis that we can scoop up before it heads back to a new all-time high.
This book is deeply personal. It is warm. You go into your personal story, and I sort of want to start there. I want to start with Natalie Brunell. I want to start with your odyssey to where you are today. How you grew up, some things happened in your life that led you to be this great libertarian that you are and Bitcoiner, et cetera.
Well, I think you and I have a lot in common. We come from very hardworking, blue-collar immigrant parents, and that's really my backstory. I watched my parents work so hard. They were born under communism in Poland, and their dream was to come here to the United States to pursue the American dream. They asked for nothing in return but just a chance, and I watched them work really so hard, 6 days a week, getting up at 3:00 in the morning outside of Chicago, scraping the snow off the car to head into work just to make their children's lives better and to offer an opportunity for their kids to get a good education. And that really made a huge impression on me. I wanted to work hard. I knew that education was going to be the vehicle for me to succeed. But I grew up not understanding the financial system. I got all the good grades in school because I had to, but I never learned how banking works, who issues money, the history of money. And I didn't get to learn all of that until I went down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And that's when things changed for me, right? I started to connect all the dots and I realized why so many people today are struggling and feeling like they're working harder for less. And I saw it as this amazing solution for economic empowerment for the average person who, again, feels like they're working hard, they're playing by all the rules, but they haven't been able to catch up in terms of wealth creation and being able to provide for their families in a way that was much easier a couple generations ago.
I want to start there, actually, because you're almost anticipating my questions. I felt like you said something, I haven't been able to completely put my finger on it yet, but you said something in the book, I'll sort of articulate it like this. There's something deeply wrong with the economy. Everybody feels it. You go out on the road, you talk to people in your family, you talk to people in your neighborhood. Something is off. We almost can't catch a breath. I went into a comic book store last night. I'll show you the comic. Okay? I have it here. And this was a comic that was produced in 1976, and it was $1. It was $1. And I was a 12-year-old boy in 1976. This is before you were born, girl. So don't get all ageist on me, okay? But I want to show it to you, okay? Because it's illustrative of what you talk about in the book. So this comic book I purchased at the Forbidden Planet, it is a reprint of a book I bought 50 years ago. I want you to look at the price there. Do you see the price?
$19.99.
Okay, so it's the exact same comic.
Yeah.
I purchased it for $1 at the local newspaper stand in my neighborhood. I bought it for $19.99. Said differently, if you're worth $100 million today and you divide it by 20, it's the equivalent of $5 million US way back in 1976 when I bought this. If you own assets, Natalie Brunell, you're going to be okay. But if you're a working class family like the one you grew up in and the one I grew up in, what are they doing to the money and how are they stealing my time and my energy? So go into that if you don't mind, because when I read your book, I was in the store last night. So I'm going to interview Natalie. So I'm going to buy this comic and illustrate this problem. All right, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I tried to spotlight in the book, that we all do sense that something is wrong, but a lot of us have turned, unfortunately, to partisan politics and placing the blame on different people or different groups, But I challenge you through the book to look deeper because it really is the financial system. And to your point, that comic book didn't change. Time has passed. And the thing that has changed is the purchasing power of the dollar. It's that the dollar that's grown that much weaker. And what's causing that? I think that's what people don't realize. And right now, because of social media, it's really powerful to see, especially young people, put, those price tags and the differences online showing like, hey, Kevin McAllister in Home Alone got to take home this big, grocery store basket for $20. And today the same one would cost $100. Like, why is that? Why is that? And I think everyone places blame on the wrong things, right? Everyone just goes to, oh, well, it's greed. Oh, it's just the corporations. Oh, it's this political party. And they want more centralization and more government to come in and fix it. But my argument in the book is that we really can't fix it until we address the core problem, which is our money, which is constantly inflated. And we need to your point, we need to acquire hard assets, ones that can't easily be diluted and debased, and ones that maintain and grow our purchasing power so that the average person doesn't feel like they're drowning. Because to your point, I mean, even if you're making raises in your income, you're actually probably experiencing deflation when it comes to your wages because of how much money they've printed and inflated away your purchasing power, which now you understand, right? The populist calls for, hey, I need a higher minimum wage. I need more this. I need more that. It's because your dollar doesn't go as far as you need it to. And a couple generations ago, you can point to things that were so much cheaper and people could afford on just one income, a middle class income. And it isn't fair. And I agree with people that something needs to be done. But instead of dividing ourselves and fighting among each other, why don't we just address the financial system and embrace a tool like Bitcoin that's available to everyone?
It's so well said. You're making a claim in the book, which I agree with. And again, I'm summarizing, but you're basically saying in the book, the root problem isn't necessarily politics or policy or even greed. It's money itself. In simple terms, you say, and our friend Lynn Alden agrees with you, the money is broken.
Yes.
So what do you mean by that statement, the money is broken?
The money is broken because you can't save in our money, right? You have to invest. You have to accumulate assets. That's the only way that you're going to maintain or grow your purchasing power. But the reason for that is because our money supply keeps growing. So every individual unit is worth less and less. That's where your purchasing power is destroyed. But unfortunately, one thing we know is that they have to keep printing in order to pay off our debt and maintain this massive tab that we've created. We have to keep printing money. So the average person is suddenly on a treadmill, right? One of the reasons I wrote the book is to help educate people that, first of all, you can't save in currency. It's just a melting ice cube. So you need to acquire hard assets. Bitcoin being, in my opinion, the best one, the most accessible one, the one that is truly for everyone. But at the same time, I think it just puts a spotlight on something, which is the incentive system within a broken financial system, right? Because it does have some political aspects and policies that were put in place with the best of intentions. Like, for example, in the 90s, they passed legislation which was meant to combat the wealth gap between the executives and the workers. And so they made executive compensation over $1 million not tax deductible, right? But where did the compensation flow to? Stocks, because lobbyists came in and said, well, stock compensation doesn't count for that. So now all of the executives are making a killing with their stock portfolios and the money printing flows into assets. And now you have an even bigger wealth gap between the executive and the worker. So great intention, wanting to close the wealth gap, but the outcome is 10 times worse. And so that's where I feel like people, again, they kind of like group off into these different political parties and groups, and they get all upset with each other. But if we come together and address the root problem, which is the fact that we live in a money printer society and we need to shift into something parallel that doesn't rely on money printing and debt, that's when we can empower the most amount of people and create a situation where there's more opportunity. The outcomes won't be equal, but they will be more fair because they'll be based on things like merit and competition and a truly free market, which I argue we have not had.
Okay, I think it's very well said. I want to take it another step though. I'm a 62-year-old guy. I don't understand it. It's too technical. It seems like a bunch of financial blather, a string of codes on the internet. How could that be worth anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that new technologies are always
I can't even play act that, by the way, because I didn't believe anything I just said. But go
well,
ahead.
totally. I know.
Give it to me. Give it to
one,
me, Natalie.
Well, one thing that I love too is, I mean, Bitcoin has been embraced by people of all ages. I know boomers and people that are, in their 90s that are obsessed with Bitcoin. So first of all, that's why I titled it Bitcoin is for everyone. Second of all, okay, so let's say you come from a different generation, technology is not your thing, but you can probably acknowledge that technology in and of itself can be transformative. It can change our lives in ways that we don't even anticipate. The biggest transformation in the last 20, 25 years has been the internet, right? And one thing that I share in the book is we all probably remember those early days in the, let's say 1990s, when the internet was just emerging. And I was watching my favorite news show at the time, Today Show, and they're sitting around going, what's the @ What's this .com thing? They all dismissed it as sort of a passing fad. Barely anyone's going to use this. And now we all have these computers in our hands. We can access more information than royalty could 100 years ago. And we are basically conducting all of our lives online. We're buying everything online. All the business has gone online. And really all of our dollars are now electronic dollars, right? So I think that we just have to be open-minded when we come across a new technology. As you take time to learn about something and embrace it, you see that it's maybe not as intimidating, as scary as you originally thought. And I think that we can look back at history and see that so many transformative technologies were first dismissed or criticized that ended up being the way of life in just a couple of years from there.
You sort of answer this question in the book. You state the question and then you answer it. I want you to give our viewers and listeners the answer. It's mainly benefited the early adopters who are already wealthy. So therefore, why is it for everyone?
Well, actually, I see Bitcoin as something that over time is a much more egalitarian system than our current one. Because if you zoom out and you look at our fiat society, for example, wealth concentrates over time. If you look at Bitcoins distribute more and more over time. So of course, if you're early to a technology, if you're early to say Amazon or Google, you have a tremendous benefit, an asymmetric opportunity. But my argument in the book is we are still early. This is a $2 trillion asset class headed for 100 trillion or more. So you're very, very early right now. But also, this is something that is going to take decades of time, transform all of our lives. And I think that we are only at the beginning stages where, this is something that I think over years, it's going to be hard to have just one Bitcoin, right? We've got like tens of millions of millionaires, but only 21 million Bitcoin. So not everyone can have just one Bitcoin. There is enough for everyone. I think in the future, we'll denominate things in Satoshis. I think more and more people will use it as the payment protocol that it was designed to be. But right now, especially here in the West, it is this powerful store of value. And I do not see it as something that concentrates wealth or creates a system of haves and have-nots the way that the fiat system does because of its inherent incentives.
Okay. Very well said. Let's keep going, if you don't mind. You write that it's not just an asset, but it's a moral and structural alternative. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I really think that when you have a system of money where no one has a special advantage, where no one can click a button and print new units in the way that we have in our current system, that inherently is a more moral system because you can't steal someone's time. When you inflate the currency, ultimately, you are stealing people's time. That's something that can't be done in Bitcoin. It's something that allows all of us to access a level playing field. Think of it as, people equate life to a game. Well, in the current game, the rules are a bit rigged, right? Especially for the people that have the most, the people that already have assets. I make an analogy to Monopoly in the book where if you've got assets, if you're, kind of close to the money printer, you benefit. The rules are rigged in your favor. Everyone else is kind of fighting for the scraps. And that's why people feel so frustrated and so left behind. Bitcoin introduces a new game of rules that are fair for everyone. No one no matter how wealthy they are, how powerful they are, no one has a special advantage that can game the system and manipulate it so that they all of a sudden can print more units and benefit from Bitcoin. That's what I think we need to create a new sort of base layer of capital so that we can build on top of it and create an economy globally that's interconnected, that offers the most opportunity for all of us to kind of compete and innovate. Right now, because of the way our system is set up, it really does benefit the incumbents and those that are already, wealthy, established, the ones that have access to capital, can leverage it. And the little guys kind of left out and they can't compete. But the thing that's going to drive prices down is competition, is people coming in with their ideas, innovating, and being able to actually have a seat at the table. And I do think that Bitcoin will offer that. Look, it's not a fix that'll happen overnight. This is a long journey. We're, again, $2 trillion in, and we've got, probably 100 million people investing in Bitcoin. But this is something that I think will be a global technology embraced by billions of people, on its way to being worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. And I think it will force prices to be lower. I mean, if you price things in Bitcoin, you're already seeing it. You are living in a more deflationary world. Homes are getting more affordable. Cars are getting more affordable. Your trips getting more affordable. That's the world I really want to see, especially for young people who have felt like they're drowning, really. They graduate from school, they're indebted, and they don't know what to do because the idea of owning a house or having equity in anything seems so out of reach. And that's not what the American dream stands for.
You make such a compelling argument. I almost don't even want to interrupt with questions. I want you to keep going. But one of the things, when I closed your book, I said, okay, we got to get the message out there. You're basically saying the system is rigged and unfair. I agree with it. Bitcoin can't be rigged and therefore really cannot be unfair. It's open, it's neutral, it's scarce, it's global. Okay, it's a trust minimizer, right? Because you're de facto trusting the decentralized system. So how do I get past, though? I'm an investor. I got a lot of young viewers and listeners as well as old viewers and listeners, but how do I get past the volatility? Everyone brings it up to me, Natalie, so tell me what you say.
Yeah, so I think that it makes for a great diversifier if you're just starting out in a portfolio. And if you look at the performance and you model out different portfolios, which there are several tools online that can do that, you see that some risk is good, right? Some volatility is good because you can create better returns for a portfolio while minimizing the overall risk. So Bitcoin is great for that. It has outsized returns. And yes, it's volatile, but if you even just add a sprinkle of it into a portfolio that's maybe a little bit more traditional, it will catapult its performance by a couple percentage points at least without adding a lot of volatility or risk. And that's where I think if you're a traditional investor, that's where you can kind of start. But just like so many of us, when I started in Bitcoin, I wasn't ready to put my whole life savings into it. I didn't feel comfortable. I assumed, I might be missing something. It's digital. It could be hacked.
What year did you start, Natalie? What year?
2017.
2017, yeah.
2017, yeah. So I rode that thing up from, couple grand to 20,000 and watched it crash back to 3,000, which was a lot to stomach. But there were so many people who I respected who had such conviction. And I thought, that's what I must be missing, because if these people can stick through these massive runs and the downturns, then I must be missing something, thinking it's so overly risky. And that's what I learned over the years. Yes, it's volatile, but that volatility has come with returns that have averaged 50 to 60% when everything else, you're just kind of hoping to get the return of the S&P 500. And then when you pile on what I show in the book, the M2 money supply, you kind of cross-reference the two, you see that, hey, you aren't even making those great returns because you're just sort of treading water with how much they've expanded the monetary base. So you think you're doing great investing in these stocks or the 60-40 portfolio, but are you? And that's something that I also challenge you with in the book, because Bitcoin can get you these outsized returns. And yes, every couple of years you have a downturn. We had one last year. But again, opportunity to scoop up some Bitcoin a little bit cheaper and wait for that next all-time high. This is that long-term savings technology that you look at with a longer time horizon and you don't trade in and out.
Yeah. So, I will, first of all, I agree with everything you just said, but I think that the other very important point on all this is that the U.S. dollar, and this is not me, this is true-flation, Natalie. The U.S. dollar has lost 32% of its value since January of 2020. We're talking about 6 years. You took a third out of the dollar, right? That's the Superman versus Spider-Man illustration I just provided. So you do need an alternative. People need to seek that. Older people have turned to gold. You and I both know that, right? When do you think there'll be that crossover point where the younger people are actually older and they're the ones that are really more... You're correct that every age bandwidth has embraced Bitcoin, but I feel like your generation has embraced it more than mine. And so when does that crossover happen?
Yeah, I think it'll be slow. I think everything happens slower than the average investor wants, right? But my generation, the millennials and the ones coming after, they are more for digital assets, obviously. They are Bitcoin proponents, they're Bitcoin holders, and they prefer something like Bitcoin over to something physical like gold. Now, that said, I don't want to... I don't want to say that gold is a terrible investment because it's not. It's done incredibly well, especially compared to Bitcoin in the last year. And I think it's because on a global level, people are looking at this need for a debasement trade or a debasement hedge because they know they're going to have to print all this money, especially to finance the deficits, the reshoring, the energy needs and infrastructure that we're going to be building. And so I think that gold has been that go-to hard money for centuries. It's sort of the thing we're going to revert back to. But my argument, and one that I sort of try to make in the book by showing the monetary history with the gold standard, is gold was wonderful until the fatal flaw kind of took over, which is that its physical nature makes it so difficult to scale that the incentive is ultimately to paper over it. And at first, you don't take on too much risk, but then centuries later, you have a system where you have bank reserves that are like, 3% compared to what they owe people. And that's not a sustainable system because you have a bunch of paper claims and nothing backing them. You have nothing finite that actually backs our money anymore. And that's where I think things got out of control because now we just print and there's no way to trust. I mean, that's why so many countries have lost trust in us because they know we're going to destroy the purchasing power and the real value of the treasuries that have underpinned the system for so long now. So gold is great. And I would be the biggest gold bug if Bitcoin didn't exist. But now we have this digital form of property, this digital gold that we can rely on for ultimately a digital economy that's globally connected. You cannot send your gold bar across the world and have it settle in a matter of an hour. You can do that with Bitcoin. That's important because again, if we take a step back, ultimately gold's just going to be papered over again and we can't trust it.
Okay, very well said. So if you've watched this program, we take your book and we come down to 5 words. And then what I do is I ask the author, I'm going to say the word, I more or less plucked it from your book, and you're going to give me a sentence or two on the word. But before we do that, I want some predictions, Natalie Brunell. What's going to happen in 2026?
I think that Bitcoin will have a year that surprises us to the upside. I think we'll hit a new all-time high. And I think that a lot of that will be led by more institutional adoption.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to pin you on a number. So let's go to my first word. I say the word inequality. You say what?
Once not fixable and now something we can address with Bitcoin.
Okay. How about I say the word freedom?
Something that we need to fight for because it's ultimately fragile and something that Bitcoin represents.
What about trust?
Something that has been broken down and at institutions and in the media, and we can rebuild through a more fair system.
Right. You know, when I think of trust, I think the humans need systems. We need systematic, outside of our control systems that we can trust because we can't really trust ourselves. We've learned that over 5,000 years. I say the word money. You say what?
Well, I say empowerment. I say something that allows you to dream big, but ultimately also not the most important thing in the world.
What's the most important thing in the world, Natalie Brunell?
I think connection, love, and purpose. I think that one thing that I found with Bitcoin, if I can go on a little tangent, is when you're struggling financially, I think it tends to bring out the worst sides in us because we tend to become very short-term minded in survival mode, right? Paycheck to paycheck. How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? Can I accomplish my goals? When you can drop that away, when you feel more secure financially, you can dream big. So the money aspect, yes, it's important, but take that to the next step. You're motivated to reach for more. You're motivated to give back. You're motivated to be of service. You feel rewarded for the work you're putting in. I think that aspect is what's missing right now. People are feeling like they're working hard, but not getting much for it. And they're disconnecting from each other, and they're becoming more depressed. They're becoming more tribal, and they're really like just thinking of the next kind of month to year rather than over the next 10 years what they can build. And so I hope that by fixing the money, we ultimately fix our souls in a way to be able to kind of cooperate better, to be the best version of ourselves, to build families, build the companies and things that we really want to create. Because money does empower you, but at the end of the day, it's really about what we build and how we can serve one another that matters the most and stands the test of time.
You're really good at this, Natalie. You're really good at this. Okay, we got the last word. Okay, I'm going to give you the last word. I say the word Bitcoin. You say what?
Hope.
It's funny because when I hear the word money, I hear inflation. And when I hear Bitcoin, I also hear in my ears hope. I see Bitcoin as something that can reset the table for everybody. And to your point about this discussion and this book, if it resets the table, it does provide hope for everybody that there'll be a fair shake in the system for the value that they're providing in the society. So the title of the book is Bitcoin is for Everyone. It's by Natalie Brunell. She is the host of a podcast called the Coin Stories Podcast, which is a phenomenal podcast. You can get to that podcast wherever podcasts are. What's your Twitter handle and Instagram handle so people can follow you, Nat?
At Nat Brunell on X and Natalie Brunell on Instagram. Please look for the blue check marks because there are a lot of impersonators out there. I never ask you for money. So please just make sure it's verified accounts.
All right, good. That's all very well said. But listen, the book is amazing. You deserve a lot of kudos for it. Now, let me show what I'm doing before we hang up here. Putting it back in my favorite books. Going right back here, okay? So that when people tune into my podcast, they can see it, Nat.
Well, thank you. And you wrote a great Bitcoin book. And one of my favorite memories from our last conversation, Anthony, was when we talked about your conversation with Michael Saylor and how much you recommended for Bitcoin and how ultimately you don't need 50 great ideas. You just need one great idea. So I know that sometimes people see my content and they think, oh, it's just about Bitcoin. But I do think that Bitcoin is this unique, special, once in a lifetime transformative technology. And everyone's portfolio is their business, but everyone's got to have at least a little bit of Bitcoin because it can change your life. It changed mine. I went from having no hope in where the world was going as a reporter covering the madness and the political division to having more hope than I could ever imagine about the future that we're going to build and the amount of abundance and opportunity that will exist when we have a more fair monetary system.
Incredibly well said. And you're not just about Bitcoin. There's so much in the messaging in your podcast and in your personal story and also in this phenomenal book.
Thank you.
So hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yes, in New York. Thank you.
All right. God bless.